Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello and welcome back, listeners. And Mahlon, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic for this beautiful early summer. Is it early summer or late spring? I'm not even sure.
I think it's still late spring. I don't think it turns into summer until June.
Well, I also think that depends on where you live, because I'm pretty sure if you live in Arizona, it probably feels like summer even now. But
Well,
here in the Midwest.
or I would say late spring for us.
Yeah, probably. Bear with us as we traverse our way through heavy topics of conversation. But before we do that, Mahlon, I believe you have a food for thought for us today.
Yeah, and actually this time around is a little bit different. So I would say it's more of, I had an opportunity to get my perspective shifted a little bit. So for those of you that have been listening regularly, we just released it's been a couple episodes ago now, we released a father's abortion right episode. And we received quite a bit of feedback on that. And so I guess my food for thought, which is really more around a perspective shift, came with the feedback we were getting off of that episode. In particular, there was about a 30-minute window on TikTok where we had, I would say, a mini viral moment.
Can I just tell you, that was so much fun. Okay, because here's what's happening. Mahlon posts this thing on TikTok, right? And all of a sudden I'm getting like text after text after text, like, oh my God, have you seen it? Oh my God, have you seen it? It was so much fun that day. I don't even remember what day that was, but it was a blast.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. One of my kids was at a track meet. But anyways, we for like 30 minutes, things were happening. Things were moving around. And I was able to see behind the curtains of what was going on. And, on that TikTok platform, I was getting added to several people's, or the account that I posted on was getting several people were adding it to their favorites. They were liking it. I was getting hearts, like a stream of hearts were coming to the side. I didn't even know that's what happened. This was like all new to me. And then I also started getting some comments, and this is where my perspective was shifted a little bit. And when I got done and the dust settled and that 30-minute viral moment had concluded, I went back through on the app and was just looking through some of the comments, the likes, that kind of stuff. And it dawned on me then that if I was an outsider looking in, and I would have gone to this, I would have seen the content that was released, and then the only thing I really would have seen is couple comments just really not enjoying what we just put out there. And it made me take a second to kind of reflect, to say there was a lot more support than there was negativity for us, Jamie, on that episode, but it was not reflected on the app at all. And so for me, my perspective shifted a little bit to say, how many times do I go and I look at content that was out there and I see the negative remarks, and I just assume the majority of the people that responded to that, or the majority of the people that listened to that content, is also siding with the people that left the content or comments. And I don't know if that's something that I just naturally gravitate towards or naturally do myself, but this really kind of opened my eyes to say, just because we can't see the positivity or the support of this information that's out there doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so this was the first time I was able to actually kind of see behind the curtain and thought, this content is not represented well, because the only people that seem to take the time to really leave any kind of remark or statement were ones that, unfortunately, this time around were maybe impacted more negatively. And so they felt, I don't know, a stronger need to leave that information. But I wonder how much of that is tainting for people that are coming across that now. And they just assume everybody that's listened to it kind of falls in line, because that's the only information or the only comments that were available on the content. So that was kind of my shift from last week, was there's a lot more support, but you just can't see it. So I was attributing that negativity to anybody that came across it. And I don't think that's fair.
You know, what's interesting about that too is, part of the reason that we have come together in this platform is because of that feeling that everything is so polarized, right? And it made me it really almost put an exclamation point behind the idea that it's like the two opposing sides are the most vocal. You know what I mean? That those are the loudest voices in these arguments, are the two polar opposite sides, but there probably are people in the middle who have just sat down. And I know I've been in that space. I know that I have a very different opinion from what I hear maybe on the news, but I'm not gonna shout about it because I feel like I'm not heard. So it kind of emphasized to me that those comments were pretty harsh. They were pretty hard. And it really, to me, just exemplified the reason why we're in this space together, and we're trying to bring together some of these ideas to say, look, we can have this conversation. It can be civil.
Completely agree with you. And, I guess the part of this that's food for thought for me is, I'm going to go forward, and even if I see content that's on all the other platforms that I'm on, and I see, negative responses, and I don't see a lot of positive, I think I'm going to start having a spark of hope that there's probably people supporting on both sides of that content. It's just, for whatever reason, maybe the negative side, to your point, maybe the side that is most negatively impacted by the content are just the loudest this time around. But that doesn't mean there's not supporters for that content. And I think the more we do this and the more we talk about it, if we can kind of inject a little bit of life back into that segment of listeners that are maybe in between, or can kind of see both sides of it, it'd be really cool to start, challenging all of those individuals. Leave your mark,
Mm-hmm.
Say something, support it, don't support it. I'm challenging myself. I don't want to stay silent anymore, because I think, without getting into too much of it, how many times do we go on any kind of social media and we put a comment out there, and all of a sudden we are just inundated with people that don't agree with us, and it's almost like we're beat down to the point it's like, I don't want to go through that headache again. But I guess my challenge is, I'm not going to just sit quiet anymore. I think I'm going to continue to put my voice out there, even if it's not the most popular, because other people are watching. And I think if they can see that support, if nothing else, they can feel it, they can see it, it's represented. And so they know that they're not alone. Because had I been looking just at the comments that were visible, I would have felt very alone, and that I was probably the only one that felt like I was kind of supporting what we were talking about. And that is definitely not the case.
Well, another thing to think about too, though, is that clip, the clip that we put, basically it was a clip from the episode, right? And it was one of the more heated points of the discussion. And really it was designed to get reaction, right? So I think that experience for me too, really made me think, because I knew what the entirety of the content was. I knew what was in that episode because I was there for it. And so, it really made me stop and remember that I can't be a headliner, right? Like I can't just read the headlines and get fired up about headlines. I really need to be able to read the whole article. I need to be able to listen to the entire thing before I form an opinion and before I react, because that, it did what it was supposed to do. It made people react. But I know there was so much more in that. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And how many times does the media do that to us with articles too?
Exactly.
Right? Like you read an article and you're like, what did they just say? And you get through the article and you're like, that's not at all what they were talking about. But again, whoever wrote the title really did their job, because I got people to come over and start reading it. And to your point, that's what we did with that clip. We wanted, the most sensational part of it to kind of be out there and challenge. And so we were calculated when we did that. And so it did, you're right, it did exactly what we wanted it to do. It's just after this dust settled, like I said, it was unfortunate that there was only one side that I think was represented in the comments, which was more of that negative side. But yeah, I'm here to say that there was probably more positive than there were negative. But again, it's not about the mix. What it's about is it was represented, but you couldn't see it from the outside. And so that's, again, my perspective shifted a little bit. I'm not going to just assume anymore that either positive or negative, the few comments that are out there on people's content, that's what the majority of the people feel. Probably is there's a lot more people being silent. And so it's hard to kind of gauge overall support from just a couple content or a couple comments. So that was my perspective or my reality shift for the week.
That's awesome. We're going to jump into gender equality in the workplace this week. So we've, I don't know, I'm going to just jump in and be super transparent with you guys. So just between you and me, we, as we were practicing podcasting, because we aren't brave enough to just throw our first attempts out there.
And everyone should say thank you for that, because it was a hot train wreck of a dumpster fire.
Be glad. Be very, very glad. This was one of the topics that we recorded. One of the first topics that we recorded. It was this, and what was the other one? It was like, keeping Christmas or something like that.
Right. Well, it had something to do with the holidays. Yeah. And again, those were our practice ones, but we liked this topic enough that we wanted to bring it back. And we re-recorded episodes before, but these two were the ones that were like, okay, let's sit down. We're podcasters. Let's record it. Hot mess.
Right. It was we walked away from that one, and it took us a little bit to even figure out why we were like, that was bad. That was really, really bad. But, so we've had, I don't know, I guess we've had a bit of an opportunity to really stop and examine this topic specifically. And, having said that, I did put it out on social media ahead of time, and just asked, do you have any experience with this, or do you have any thoughts about this topic? And we did get some feedback. I think it was on Facebook, right, Mahlon?
Yeah, it was. And again, first of all, thank you for everybody that is, coming to the table and willing to leave their comments and leave in their voice. And it might be uncomfortable, or for whatever reason, you've learned to just kind of sit quietly or sit down and like, hey, I don't want to just rock the boat. But we appreciate you putting your voice out there into the mix. So first, before we even get going, thank you for everybody who participated. Yeah,
for sure. For sure. I did it on accident. It wasn't even on purpose. Okay. So on our Facebook page, we had a little bit of feedback. It is a pretty long comment. Some good stuff here. So if you aren't following the Facebook page, you can see it if you follow the Facebook page. So
which is what, Jamie?
That would be Roundtable Mindset Podcast on Facebook.
Go follow us.
Just look for a logo. All right. So one of our followers says that they do believe that gender inequality is happening, but not how we normally look at it. That women are getting their fair share of good careers at the expense of men. So the opinion seems to be that women are getting jobs from men. Is that kind of how you would surmise what's being said here?
And again, appreciate the comment and appreciate the feedback. And again, don't ever want to misunderstand or try to read into what people are leaving, but we do only get to work off of what we get in the platform. And when I read that, Jamie, what I was reading that into as was this, that there's a little bit of inequality that's happening between men and women in the workplace, which is, given all things being equal, jobs, opportunities would be slanted towards the women in this workforce, rather than keeping it equal or even slanted it towards the men. So that's how I took it, is in this workplace, this individual is kind of seeing it as more opportunities are being presented, are available, or being used. I don't know if that's the right word, but from a female side at the detriment of maybe some of the men. So opportunities are not as free flowing for the male in the workforce because they are being given towards the women. That's how I took that statement.
Well, that seems like a good place to jump off, I suppose. So, and I think they did specifically cite like IT, that IT was an industry where that clearly there's a heavy domination of men in the workforce, but also a disparity of women who are graduating with those kind of degrees, and that might be one of the reasons for that difference in the workforce.
And I do, again, jumping off, I do want to say that I think that's something, and I'm going to go back onto my experiences a little bit here. Inclusion and diversity in the workplace is a great thing. I'm just going to put that out there. But I do think there's not a lot of thought that goes into, can the workforce sustain or support the different percentages of, in this case, we're just talking gender. So we'll just say, the gender mix between men and the male and female in particular roles. So staying in the IT lane, because I've been working in IT for almost 20 years, absolutely correct, was mostly a male dominated field. You didn't see a lot of, female developers for whatever reason when I first started. And that landscape is starting to shift. But let's just say that there are, for every 3 men that are graduating with an IT degree, there's 1 woman who does it. Well, if the percentages of graduation are 25% female to 75% men, and then you get into the workforce and the job or the company is trying to say, we need more women in IT, so we need to hire more women, where are they pulling that from? And so to me, and I think this kind of goes off with the person who was giving the comment, is you kind of have to make sure your workforce can sustain that. Because I think ultimate goal is, yes, we want equality in the workplace. We want every man and woman to have the equal share or opportunity for these positions. But if you don't have the workforce to kind of get to that percentage, it doesn't feel like companies are maybe taking that into account. They're just pushing for more diversity, more women into the IT workforce, when we don't have the numbers to support that. And so that kind of gets into something that I was, wanting to talk about too, which is, are people being hired into these positions not because they're maybe the most qualified, but because they check a box on, somebody's matrix of, diversity?
Mm-hmm. Well, and, I guess, I can't speak to that specific field because it's not my experience. What I can say, I think if you were to microcosm in, if you were to put a microscope on any one industry, you could probably point out specific things about each of those industries. I guess I'd like to pull it out a little farther and look at it as a whole. And maybe talk about overall, like, I have seen, and I have read quite a few articles and quite a few studies this week, regarding this specifically. I've seen anywhere from 81 to 84 cents, difference, or like women make 81 to 84 cents compared to men. So for every dollar, a woman makes 81 to 84 cents. And that's an average. absolute average, right?
And that's interesting because I also have some information that I've done that kind of counters that just a little bit. So I'm curious, do you have any other context to those numbers that you were sharing? Is that for individuals that hold a high school diploma? Is that bachelor's degree? Is that master's, doctorate? Do you kind of know where those numbers are coming from?
The way and the reason I looked at those numbers, because it's different. Like I said, it's different per field. Like they did kind of go into some specific industries, right? That in the service industry, it's not as big of a gap. But in like legal services, it's a much bigger gap. So this was really an average across age, across industry.
What about geographic? What about geographic area? Do you think that has a play into it, or did that go across all of it?
It didn't seem to. It seemed like it was pretty. They used census information to gather this. So there wasn't, because even one of them broke it down by age. So like women in the baby boomer generation, the gap is much wider than it is in like 16 to 24 year olds. So, and that kind of made sense to me too. But I guess the point for me is that all things being equal, if we take a snapshot from 1960 and a snapshot from 2022, because that was the most explicit information that I could find, the newest, most explicit information I could find as far as like complete, not just assumptions based on studies that are coming. But if you take that snapshot, there is still a clear gap between baseline men and women and how much they earn.
And I will agree with that to an extent. I think the information that I found I have a diagram here and I wish you could see it, Jamie, but it talks about male wages, and we start off with in across the board, it's talking about male hourly wage, and it's comparing the difference to female hourly wage in comparison to the male in the same industry. So this goes industry against industry, right? Again, I don't think you can go down through that microscope and get to every single detail, but this is kind of, I'm assuming, reading the article, looking at the diagram, it's kind of bubbled up a little bit to that higher level, so you can go across and make these comparisons. So I will say that. But what I'm looking at here says that those that have a high school diploma only, the hourly wage, and again, this is a couple years old.
A couple is in 2 years old?
I think it's 2017 was the last date that I saw.
Okay.
So we're approaching 5 years, assuming it's somewhere in 2017. And what this is saying is for a high school diploma, an hourly for a male hourly wage is $11.93. This is what I found completely interesting. For females in the same category, so they have a high school diploma, and that's all the education they have, on average, women made 24.4% less than the males did in this category. So
you're saying that with a high school diploma, a man will make $1 and a woman would make 76 cents. Is that what?
Roughly.
Am I doing the math right?
Yeah,
okay.
Roughly. However, once you get into those that have an associate degree compared to there's a high school diploma, for a male, and again, we'll just try to keep the math easy. So we'll just say for $12 an hour at the high school diploma, a male will make 22.3% more than that with an associate's degree. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Now here's where the story starts getting a little interesting. A female with the same level of degree will make, in comparison to the male wage, so this is not saying, I kind of want to put that out there. So the male's making 22.3% more than that $12 an hour high school diploma. A female will make 5.3% more than the male will with the same degree. And that number changes, but the spread between the female and the male does not, according to this diagram in this article.
I'm not so does it just stop at associate's degree?
No, it goes on and says for a bachelor's degree, it compared to the high school. So again, we're talking $12 an hour. A male that has a bachelor's degree will make 62.2% more with a bachelor's degree compared to a high school diploma. And the females will make 5.3% more than the male will having a bachelor's degree.
See, I did not. And honestly, I searched every way I possibly could because I knew you were going to be like, statistics can tell whatever story you want them to tell, right? Because this is your anthem.
Well, and again, I can get your yes, I want everyone to know I don't like statistics because I think you can make statistics tell any story you want. I don't, and that's from my own basis I took statistics. I don't like them. However, if we're going to go statistics against statistics, I do think it's interesting. And I have some other articles that we'll get to in a little bit where you can see that if all things are considered equal across the board, and we're just talking about education between the male and the female, you can see that they make more. Now, am I going to say it's a certain dollar amount? Yes, this article says 5.3%, but the education is the same. The industry is the same. And here we have data, metrics that are saying, well, in this case, females actually make 5.3% more than the males will, all things considered.
Well, it might have something to do, like, because whenever I find studies, whenever I find reports and things like that, this is something that I have to do for work. Like, I get the data, I get the outcomes, and then I have to make sense of it, right? I have to understand why we got to where we got to and where we need to improve and where we're doing well, right? So if I'm thinking about these two things, not having it in front of my eyeballs like you do, an associate's degree is required for things like childcare, preschool teaching, things like that, which are pretty female-dominated professions, right? I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking in my own life. I don't know many men in my life that have an associate's degree or that haven't gone on to get a higher level of education than that.
Well, but let's just be clear though. We don't know. I mean, there could be several people that stop at an associate's degree for whatever reason, right? And go on and have
absolutely,
and have very successful careers. I just want to make sure what I'm hearing you say isn't that men stop there. And again, this diagram and this article, what it's really saying is, again, the numbers to me, the wage that it gave us was just kind of like a great example. But somewhere along the line, we're starting to see in the industry, women are being compensated more than we're seeing in the men counterparts. Now, I understand 15 years ago, as a man that would make more than a woman, you probably wouldn't hear me complain a lot about that. And I'm not really even complaining that women are making 5.3% more than men, because I think, again, industry by industry, and I'm sure a lot of factors are going into here, and this is a national average, and there's probably industries where women make less than men. But I think the trend here is what's kind of showing is that it's moving in that direction, or at least it appears to be moving in that direction.
Well, I wasn't arguing that at all. I think that if you go back to the numbers that I found, there weren't a whole lot. There was like a whole gap in studies. There was a whole gap in even articles about gender equality in the workplace and pay equity and things like that. Most of them was from like early 2010s. And then there was some 17, 18, 19, and then there was some from 2022. And those were pretty much focused on post-pandemic work environments and things like that. But 15 years ago, and even in those 2017 studies, there's been progress. I'm not arguing that there hasn't been progress. I guess my point is that have we arrived? Are we done? And I guess I would say no, we're not done. That until all things considered, pay equity is equity. Are we done? Until all things considered, there's equal representation of women in high level executive positions. We're not done. I do know, I had read some studies that women are finishing college at higher rates than men. And it has been that way for the last few years. So if we have more graduates coming out of college, more women graduating coming out of college with degrees, why are those statistics so upside down in that? Why isn't pay equity across the board as a national average based on census information? Why isn't that equal? Why isn't it closer to equal?
Well, and my answer to that is, again, based off the articles that I'm reading, my experience, I feel like this is kind of like a pendulum, and it has been favoring the men for a very long time, which I am not saying men should be paid more than women. If you can do the job just as good, I don't care if you're male or female, you should get compensated, and there should be no difference in the compensation. But what I'm saying is, for historical purposes, this pendulum has been favoring men for many decades, and I think
forever,
for many decades, and so
forever,
and so I'm seeing that pendulum is starting to swing. Where my questions are coming in is, are we overcompensating that? And now is the pendulum starting to swing more in favoring the women over the men, for no other reason than, well, the men have benefited from it for so much, for so long. Now it's the women's time to get paid. And again, I'm trying to be very neutral in my comments, because it's not about women don't deserve to get paid for the work that they do. I'm just saying, are we starting to see the scales tip where we're no longer going after equality in the workforce between men and women? We're actually promoting inequality, because now we're overcompensating, and now jobs and opportunities are starting to go more towards women over men for no other reason than they're women. And again, we've already established for decades the balance has kind of favored men. So I'm almost saying, are we starting to overcompensate, and now that pendulum is swinging a little too far, and we're just going to have decades now where women make more and opportunities go to women because they're women?
I can definitely see where you're coming from on that, because every major corporation in America has nothing but women at the top ranks of their executive boards. And women are definitely making $1.20 an hour to your 84 cents. I mean, gosh, that is definitely happening in our workplace, in our communities. Well, how can you say that we're overcompensating when it's still not equal? Well, there's growth happening, there's change happening, but it's not equal.
No, and I don't think it's ever going to be equal, and that's what I'm saying. Even with the numbers that I was finding, it's already not equal. It's already being more favored towards women than it is for men, even by a small margin of 5.3%. And you're right. We don't have a strong mix of female leaders within companies, but that's changing, and I think that's great. As you know, Jamie, I work for the company that I work for has a female CEO, and she is amazing, and she's probably the best CEO that I've ever worked for. And, not only is she very intelligent, and she's able to, lead, and she's able to do, all these different wonderful tasks as a CEO, and she's able to keep the company moving forward and being innovative and being out in front and being an industry change agent. She's also kind of taking into account all of the people that work for her, and there's an element of empathy and relatability to her that I haven't really found in a lot of my other companies and CEOs. Now, a lot of things go into that other than just her gender, but I'm saying those are the differences that I'm seeing. But you're right. There's not a huge representation at that higher level across companies, but I think it's changing, and I think it's going to continue to change. And again, when do we stop? I don't think we ever stop. I think we keep safeguarding and keep trying to strive for equality. However, I don't think you can ignore the things that are coming up from the male workforce and from these studies and all of this information that we're finding, is that you can almost see the trend that's taking place, which is now it's I hear in conversations, and you might not have intended it, Jamie, but there's even a little bit of a slide in what you're saying is, okay, it's time for the women to be, their turn to come around. And I agree with that. I just don't want that to happen at the detriment of a man. You shouldn't have to take from somebody to give a leg up to somebody else. Even though historically that has happened and that's horrible, we should be better going forward, and we should safeguard ourselves to make sure that's not happening. And I just don't know if that is. I'm struggling a little bit with the at the detriment to a man comments when,
so much in history has been at the detriment to others. You know what I'm saying? When you're part of the majority group, I guess my question for you is, do you have the ability? Do you have the opportunity? Do you consider yourself an ally for other women in your workforce? When you hear disparaging comments, when you see a woman not get not get credit for her work, when you see inequity in the workforce, do you say something? Do you take the time to listen? Have you heard stories of women in your workplace and how they feel about the treatment of them in their workplace?
So yes, from my perspective, and again, the things that have happened decades before we got around, Jamie, I am not a proponent of men should have the leg up over women. I think it should be equal. I do want to just take a moment to say, if a man and a woman can do the same job, they should get the same pay. All things considered, education and I know experience kind of play into that. But if the job can be done at the same level from both man or female, man or woman, it should be the same pay. There shouldn't be a difference. And I would say that, as a man, I would say we shouldn't get more money just because we're male. And I'd also say we shouldn't pay a female just because she's female. So I just want to put that out there. Now, to answer your question, in the workforce that I've been part of, I can see over the many years, there's huge advancements in companies to diversity and inclusion. And again, it's not all bad, but I will say they don't always hit the mark like they're supposed to. And I think outside of gender, we won't talk about, because I know this conversation is just about gender, but you can see where it's almost overcompensating into the companies that at least I've had a front row seat to see. I've been on teams, I've been in meetings, I've seen firsthand comments of saying, hey, we need to hire somebody else, and we need to make sure we hire more women in the workforce. We need to bring women into the department. And again, I think the spirit behind diversity is wonderful. You need diversity. That's where ideas come from. That's where you don't just stay stagnant. So diversity is not the issue here. I think where I'm coming from is that what people are looking for is only for the diversity. They're not looking beyond that to say, if we put an application out there, or if we put a requisition for a new role out there, and we get 100 applicants and 97 of them are male and 3 of them are female, let's just look at the 3 that are female and kind of disregard the other 97. And I've seen that firsthand kind of happen, where the focus wasn't on their skill set. The focus wasn't on what they bring to the table. The focus was really about, we need to bring more of this diversity into our teams, into our workforce. So we need to bring and fill this role with a woman. And I do take a little bit of an issue with that, just because it shouldn't be male or female that fills a role. It should be the best qualified candidate. And if by doing that, you have a mix of 80% women to 20% men, or 20% women to 80% men, it shouldn't really matter. It should be about the quality of the person who's sitting into that chair.
It's interesting that you bring that up because, and I would be surprised, depending upon what it was that you were looking for when you were doing your Googling. But I found several articles that talked about the value of just having women in the workplace, just having them on the team, and the things that they bring to a team. and how most of the consumers in America are women. Most of the people making purchasing decisions in this country are women. And so having those people on your team just adds value to any sort of industry, any sort of business model. To have women sitting around the table is going to help you market your product better. So I think what is a little frustrating to me is that, being a woman who is capable of doing the job is an added value. It is something that is needed around those tables. And so, just discounting, I feel like what frustrates me so much about this conversation specifically is this idea that on so many things, when you have two populations where one is the majority and the other is minority, then anytime there's this shift that starts happening in culture and shifting in equality for those different things, the majority feels like by giving something to a minority group, then that's taking something away from them. And that isn't necessarily what is happening. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's taking something from you to ensure that women in the workplace are being treated equally.
And I get that's what you keep saying, equally. What I'm challenging is, I have no problem. Everybody should be equal. I mean, you and I are saying the same thing. We want men and women to be equal in the workforce, pay, opportunities, all of it.
You've said that.
But what I'm
you've
saying,
shared that.
But what I'm saying is, I think that what's actually happening is we're overcompensating that, and there are situations where opportunities and pay increases are going to women over men for no other reason than, well, we need to have a woman sitting in a chair in a role. Because I've seen firsthand, Jamie, where we've hired individuals that came into the role, into the department. They could not do the job, but we hired them because, again, everybody I think is trainable to an extent, but we hired them for the fact that they were a woman. And so you look at that metrics, and I'm not saying that the woman that was hired isn't capable. Everybody's trainable, but why would we just make special concessions to bring somebody who has very little to no experience in the field that we expect them to perform at? Look at them and say, now we're expecting great things from you. They have very little either formal education or training to do the job, but because they are female, they got the role. Like that alone to me sets the person up for failure. And how does that make them feel? But I've seen that firsthand happen. I've witnessed that.
I think I can see where that is. I can see where that is your perspective. I can see that your perspective comes from your lived experience. What I'm saying is I want to challenge that perspective a little bit in a way that you can't experience. You can't experience what it's like to work in your business as a woman. And I would venture to say, I don't know. Have you listened? Have you asked? Have you tried to hear from women who are trying to make it in these fields, who are trying to be recognized as equal? Have you heard their experiences? Have you tried to see it from another perspective? I quite frankly, I'm not the person to give that to you because I don't work in your field. But I would imagine there are people there. There are women who work in your workplace who have been in the field for all kinds of years. Some of them will tell you, yeah, it's way better than it used to be. I do feel like I'm compensated well for what I do. I'm compensated a lot better than I used to be for what I do. But I would imagine there are also stories of women who have endured quite a few injustices to get there. And it I don't know. I have a hard time without without making the statistics myself, without doing my own like surveys and research and things and saying, I can say that this is equal to this study is equal to this study. But when it's the same organization that's been doing and tracking these numbers for years, I'm assuming they're tracking them in the same way. So when you still have, when you have growth, but you still have a disparity, is it equal? Is it where it should be? And can you really say that it's overcompensating?
Well, and
that,
I totally hear where you're coming from. I can hear your frustration. I can hear that you do not agree with my stance.
It's not just frustration. And I really, right there, you're like, oh, I hear you're getting frustrated. I'm going to be the calm man.
I wasn't being patronizing.
I'm going to be the calm man. And it felt that way for a minute.
No, I was
saying,
I can hear you, and I can hear that you're getting upset, and I can hear that you're frustrated, and I can hear that you don't agree with me. And to me, that's fine. Like that's what we're working through. But I also have a couple more articles to share with you that I think is really fascinating. And one of which is, you're right. I don't live in everybody else's shoes. I found an article from Ernst & Young that talk about the workplace dynamic. And it has a study done with both men and women in the study and gives the top 5 reasons why men are feeling not even like this group of people. So this mix of men and women are giving examples of why they think as a whole, men are starting to be overlooked.
I guess my point is that if you look at a company, if you look at an industry, if you look at a specific sector, you can find all kinds of things. You can find, I work in a field that is dominated by women. We have more women, probably by 90%. I don't know if that's a true statistic or not. I'm just saying in the people that I know that work this field, there's a ton of women and very few men. But my point is that I think the entire problem is being aware of equality in the workplace. Are we paying attention as individuals, maybe not as decision makers, maybe not as policy makers in the companies that we work for? Are we paying attention? Are we doing what we can to make sure that all people have a voice in the workplace? Are we making sure that the majority is not drowning out the minority, and that we can all come to a table and say, tell me your experiences, and maybe put our own experiences, especially if we're in the majority, to the side to say, tell me what it's like for you.
But we live in a society where the minority voice is the loudest now, and people are only listening to the minority.
That is so not true. I don't even know. That is your bias. That is where you come from because you sit in a chair where you are the majority. And this is not, I'm not even talking about race or ethnicity. I'm talking about all things being equal. You have a majority position in everything. Always.
Well, not in your job.
No, but guess what? The people who
so it's not
write
always.
The contracts, except the people who write the contracts for my job, guess what? The people who make the laws that dictate my job, guess what? You are the majority.
Me being a male.
Yes.
Okay. So explain to me then, in the society that we live in today, why is it that we hear so much from the minority group if it's all about the majority? And this is my kind of stance against that. First of all, you and I agree on the big things, which is we both want equality in the workplace between men and women. We both want that. I think where we're looking at from a little bit of difference is that you're seeing, well, maybe you can tell me what you're seeing, but what I'm seeing is it's feeling like we are now crossing that threshold where we are going down the path of now women are starting to have more of the opportunities than men, and they're getting more of the opportunity. And we're looking to say, okay, we're compensating because it's been the other way for so long. And we have diversity and inclusion, which is focusing on the minority. Like
okay, but
can't
you're going to go
ignore
on to
that.
16 different points, and I don't even get to address this one thing. You feel that women are being overcompensated or are provided extra something. Talk to the women who have fought their way through glass ceiling after glass ceiling after glass ceiling and ask them, were you given a head up? Were you given a foot up? Were you given extra something to make it so that you are now outperforming men? Like it doesn't make sense.
I'm not saying that they are getting leg up. What I'm saying is opportunities are coming, promotions are coming, and before you look at the person, which is where we should be, right? Let's learn from our past decades where men had the upper hand. And I'm big enough to say men did have the upper hand. We were paid more, we had the positions, all of it. But instead of going through that, just switch the roles, why can't we learn to say it's about the quality of the person that's going into that role and has no bearing on the gender? And I don't think we're there. And I think we're moving away from that. And again, I think we're moving towards, I'm not saying women are getting special treatment and saying, hey, they're getting all these little perks and stuff. What I'm saying is when a promotion comes due, it's seeming like more and more times men are being overlooked in order to promote that minority group, in this case, women.
I guess what I get so frustrated about is it's like, it's the same thing that has frustrated me whenever we get to this space in these conversations. It's this idea that like, it's this idea that because you found an article, and quite frankly, I found a couple of articles too where men report being discriminated against, and that's, not as often as women.
It happens.
But,
but it doesn't. But if you look at the trends, it could be happening more and more. And that's all I'm saying is, why do we have to have it swing the other way? Why can't we just make it about the individual and make it about their qualifications? And regardless if they're male or female, that should be the last thing that we even look into. We even worry about.
I don't feel like that's I don't feel like that's what I'm saying either. I'm not saying if you have a man and a woman who apply, always hire the woman. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that workplaces can be hostile places for women. And there are lots of examples of how that plays out. There are lots of examples about how when we work in male-dominated workplaces, and that is part of my experience. It is part of my experience where I was minimized as a human being because I was a woman in an agency with men in charge who were older and of a totally different generation. And you could totally feel how that must have been for women in that time frame. Still, and that was, it was 20 years ago, well, and way past the time.
And that sucks. And what I'm saying is, I think men are starting to experience that more and more. And I think that's at the heart of it. Men can be discriminated against at work just as much as women can. And I think the fact that it's becoming more and more commonplace just speaks to the fact that it is kind of tilting the other way now. I would like it to kind of stop and have us say, let's just give the best position to the best person.
I think that has always been what's happened. And men have thought that women weren't the best person because they weren't as smart or they weren't as strong or they weren't as whatever, or they were too emotional. I think honestly, that's why it triggered me so much when you were like, I can hear you getting frustrated because it's like, I can't be president because when I have my period, I might hit the button. You know what I mean?
Well, no, but I think
these gender biases it's not okay.
But your sensitivity to that stereotype has nothing, shouldn't color what I was saying. What I was saying is, I hear you and I understand that you're getting frustrated. I understand that you're getting angry. I understand. I don't want to continue to have you feel those feelings, but I in this conversation, I can understand where you're coming from is what I was trying to say. But that doesn't, in my opinion, I still think we are heading into a place in the workplace. We are heading into an area where I think the scales are tipping, and I think it's becoming more and more commonplace for men to start taking a back seat if they want to or not. It's kind of happening to them. And my question, which still stands, is, are we swinging too much the other way, and is that going to continue?
Well, I can imagine that would be the way you feel about that.
Well, I don't think
I don't think it is swinging the other way. And I don't think that we have even hit middle yet. And that's, yeah, I don't feel we've even hit middle. I don't know that we can worry about it swinging the other way until it hits middle.
Well, and again,
and maybe we can't maintain middle. Maybe that's not an option. I don't know.
And I think what's really interesting of all of this research that I did is that the temperature in the workforce for men and women is almost like a self-realization that there is some inequality that is still happening. And I think what's happening more and more is people are starting to recognize that that's happening to men. Where, again, I'm agreeing with you. For decades, it was commonplace to just completely dismiss a woman. Again, they weren't educated. They didn't have the high-paying jobs. But we're now in a place where that's no longer the case. And we're starting to see where men are starting to get passed over and men are starting to get some of those opportunities lost to them for no other reason other than they are male. And so we are looking somewhere else to fill that role.
How do we know that's just because they're male?
Well,
though, I mean, maybe it's because they're crappy at their jobs, or maybe it's because they're crappy people. Maybe it's because they don't treat the workplace with respect and equality. I think that's, how do we know it's just because they're men?
I think that's where you're going to see spots of that happening. But when you can see a trend across the workforce as a whole, I think that's where you're going to have to start. Like, we should start paying attention. And I think that's happening.
When the trend across the workforce has been that it's that men dominate most sectors of, and even human service sectors. Oftentimes you have like executive directors that are men. So it's still being led unequally.
Well, and that's the end result, Jamie. But how much of that is changing, though? How much of those hard lines are softening? Yes, I think you have a good point that you're sitting here saying that it's still dominant, it's still being led. But if you look across and you look down a couple layers, in the hierarchy that I used to work in, you'd have 5 or 6 layers of men running the company, running the department, running the team, and then you'd have workers that would be women. That is no longer the case. Now you have, in those higher ranks, you have women holding managerial roles. You have women holding vice president roles. You have women holding president roles. You also have CEOs that are women. Now, are they the same number as men currently? No, but I think you have to also pay attention to the fact that those numbers are softening and those numbers are changing. So yes, right now you can say men are still dominating, but I think if you ignore the trend, you are ignoring the progress that is happening. All I'm saying is, are we going to go the other way? Because that seems like where we're going rapidly. And I don't want anybody to get a job or to get a promotion or get opportunity just because of their sex.
I think some of the frustration comes from the fact that as a man sitting here and talking about these things and saying, but I think the pendulum is swinging the other direction, dismisses the experiences that are currently happening. Do I think those numbers are softening? Absolutely. And it's exciting. It makes me hopeful for generations after us that the wage disparity is smaller among millennials than it is among baby boomers. This makes me hopeful for where we're heading, right? What's frustrating is by hearing you say, but I think the pendulum might be swinging the other direction rapidly, it dismisses all of the things that are still left to do. And that's my point. I'm saying we're not done. We're not equal yet. When we have 47% of the workforce being women, there should be 47% representation in leadership roles on average, not in any specific sector. But those numbers aren't close to equal yet. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is that when we hear, but it's swinging the other direction and men are being overlooked because of X, Y, and Z, and that's because they're just men, then that dismisses my experiences. And it makes me feel as though those experiences still aren't being heard and still aren't being considered. And I don't know why that is or how that changes. But my male counterparts are still leading the industries and still leading the workforces, I need to know that they hear me. I need to know that they hear that I feel like I'm not equal. And that's not okay with me.
No, and I see all that and I understand that. And I want this to continue too. I don't want there to be suddenly a new glass ceiling that has to be imposed for women and saying, okay, you've climbed the ladder long enough, now you're done. That is not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is now we're starting to look at opportunities for women in different ways. That doesn't discount, or at least I'm not trying to discount the fact that all of the work that's come.
So do me a favor. I'm going to interrupt you again. I'm going to interrupt you again. And I've done this several times this episode, and I know this, but I'm going to interrupt you again and say, so do me a favor. Stop there. Stop at the end of that phrase and put a period on it and stop. Say, I don't want it to end there and I want it to be equal and I feel like it should be equal, period. Because then that stops diminishing my experiences and that stops diminishing me as a part of the workforce. And it just leaves out there the intent. When you continue that sentence and then qualify it, that is where I feel dismissed. And that's where I feel like I'm not being heard.
But by doing that, you're denying me the rest of my thought, the rest of my experience. You want me to set down what I'm experiencing in the workforce, what I'm observing in the workforce, so it doesn't offend somebody else. And what I'm saying is, why can't we come together to say, listen, there's still work to be done to be equal, but why can't we do it in a way where it benefits everybody? Like
nobody is, but that's the thing. I'm not coming to you saying you now need to be at detriment, because I have been at detriment for years, because women have been at detriment forever. Now it's your turn to take a back seat and let us lead the way and you sit down and shut up. That's not at all what I said. What I'm saying is that when you, not you, not you personally, but when men in general, the people who are the majority and in charge of most of these things, says, oh no, I hear you, but it dismisses everything that happens before that, because then it stifles what we're trying to say. So I'm not telling you that you don't get to have your opinion or you don't get to share your opinion. What I'm saying is that your opinion has dominated for a long time, and that indicates to me a refusal to recognize the experiences of women now and coming up and behind us and in front of us and beside us. You know what I'm saying? I
do, but I disagree even with that, because I'm not trying to say that all of the experience, all of the work that women past, present, and future are going to do to better the workforce for that gender is now throw it out, it's garbage. What I'm saying is I'm trying to bring to light is the fact that there are situations that are happening that are hiring individuals. 40 years ago, Jamie, it was commonplace to hire a person because they were a man. I don't see it being a far stretch to say in the next 40 years from now that we are hiring people because they are a woman.
You're saying that's happening right now.
In some degrees.
And yet it's still not equal.
Some degrees, but it shouldn't be that way. That's what I'm getting to. It shouldn't have been hiring people just because they were men, and it shouldn't be we're hiring people just because they're women. And that's what I'm trying to say is I am starting to see real life examples. And again, as a man, you said I'm a majority. Well, in the majority that we have, there are opportunities and there are advancements that are no longer coming our way because they are going to people. And I have sat in the room when all the discussion was not on what's the best hire, what's the level of education, what's the work experience. It was, we need to bring some diversity into this team, so we're going to hire a woman. And I think if I was a woman and I was hired just because that was the criteria I was trying to check off of a checklist, I would feel diminished by that in and of itself. That's not progress. That's pity. And to me, I want people to say, you are the best person for this role. It encourages me so much, Jamie, that you gave that number, that statistics, that more women are graduating with higher degrees than ever before. I hope that trend continues. I just hope it doesn't happen at the detriment of men, which I don't think it is, but I'm just saying that's a great example. And that's going to overall impact and adjust the workforce by itself. But I cannot be quiet and say I haven't seen it firsthand where that is happening, where it's just, we need to interject some diversity in here. So we need to get some women on the team. Now, I'm sure people are going after.
What is wrong with saying we need some diversity on this team?
Nothing.
And we need to.
Nothing. But if you're hiring people just because they bring diversity and they don't bring experience or education, then why are they there?
Sure. What executive or hiring agent in any agency is going to say, you know what? Let's go get any guy off the street. Let's go get any woman off the street, regardless. Let's go pluck her out of the grocery store cashier line and put her as an executive in our company. That's not reality. That is like exaggerating. It's exaggerating the intent of these things. And you know, I in no way do I want to diminish what you have experienced, because perception is reality. We've talked about that. I guess what I'm saying is that your perception is so big that I feel like you're not hearing my perception. And my perception is that I know that in my position in the company that I work for, I can walk across the street and know that the male-led nonprofit agency is going to have an executive or assistant executive that is going to be paid more than I will. And that's reality. And that's not just my reality.
And I think there where you and I can come together, Jamie, is I think right there, that is something that needs to change. If you can walk across the street and do the same job as the gentleman you're thinking of, and they are willingly to pay you less than that person, and you have the same experience, you have the same education, you have the same ability to do the job, that needs to change. I'm 100% with you. 100% with you. However, however, what I'm saying, because I want to make sure because I think you keep trying to blend the two together, and I'm saying I agree with that. That is a travesty. That needs to change. There's no excuse for that. Put a period, move on. Next sentence. However, if you walk across the street and there's a gentleman and there's you that are going for the same role, he has more experience than you, and they hire you because you're bringing diversity with you, I think that is also a travesty. Because again, we should be looking at the individual and what they bring to the table, what their skill sets are, what their education is, and then we should be hiring accordingly. So I want to make sure there's that distinction. I feel like I've beaten this to death enough, but I'm saying I agree with you with the first thing. If you and a man can do the same job, there's no reason why you should be paid any less than he is. Absolutely none. And the fact that happens.
The thing is that you looking at that situation, you could look at that situation and say, she's getting this promotion because she's a woman. Outside of, if you were the man, if you and I were competing for the same position in the same industry because we had the same whatever, and you had more experience, but maybe I bring something different to the table, but your perception walking away from that is going to be, they brought her in because she's a woman. And I think that's the point that I'm getting at, is that your perception is going to color these things. And it may be because maybe they hired me because I'm younger. Maybe they hired me because I have some good marketing ideas. Maybe they brought me in because I have an energy that you didn't have. It may not be just because I'm a woman, but because you're a man, you could easily walk away from that saying, they picked her because she's a woman and they wanted more diversity on their board. You know what I'm saying?
No, because what I'm trying to get at is there's situations that I have been part of, that I have seen, and it's been exactly those conversations. I'm not saying that doesn't happen across the board. Jamie, I've competed with my last company. There was a lady that I competed with, and we were in the same role. She was fantastic. She got promotion before I did, and she very much deserved it. And I never once had sour grapes to say, well, of course she got it because she's a female. What I'm saying is there are situations happening where those kinds of conversations are indeed taking place. And I think you're starting to see that across. I mean, again, the metrics and the research that I've done and the articles that I brought up, I think you can start seeing that tone that's happening across men and women in the workforce. They're starting to recognize there's some sort of imbalance starting to take place. I don't want that to say anytime a woman succeeds, now it's tainted and colored because they only got that because they were a woman. No,
but you putting that out there the way that you've been putting that out there, that's exactly how it feels. That now it almost minimizes any woman that does get those positions, especially over a man, because this is what's happening. It's happening all over. So this is probably what happened here, and it's probably what happened there. The loud message that I'm hearing is, but women are being given these things just because they're women, and they aren't deserving.
I think there are situations where exactly that is happening, because that has happened for years, right? I mean,
but how long are they going to last? I mean, honestly, you put a woman in that position and she sucks and she crashes and burns and drives the company down. They're not going to last very long. You know what I'm saying? It's not like that's forever.
I have trained many people in roles, men and women. Let's put that out there. I have trained many men and women in roles that they did not have any business being in there because there was some checkbox that they had, that management leadership had to fulfill. And so they just pulled people over, and they were a warm body that were expected to perform. To give you some context, and again, maybe my viewpoint is skewed a little bit from IT, and I will say that. We had a whole section of people in our department that were changed jobs from one thing to another with a snap of management's finger. And they had a certain amount of time to get up to speed. And guess what? Most of those people left because they couldn't do the job. They could not perform it. And what I'm saying is I have personally worked and trained individuals to make them successful in their job. And you're right. Sometimes they don't cut it. They don't like the pressure. They leave. It's not fair to them. And sometimes they do. But that's not either here nor there. What I'm just saying is, there has to be, and I think in both of our arguments, I think there's room for me to understand, okay, how I'm presenting that. I can see how that could be impacting or coloring the fact that any accomplishment a woman makes is just going to be skewed because they're a woman. So I need to make sure that I am tempering my words better, and I am taking that to heart. But at the same time, I don't know how you can sit there and say that my examples don't exist, because I think in a workforce, that's just naturally going to happen. And the only thing that I was trying to say at the beginning of this discussion was, I just want us to make sure we're aware that it's starting to happen, and how do we prevent it from becoming more, the pendulum swinging, the scales tipping. And so now we are just giving people because they're female. I'm seeing situations where that's happening today. How do we make that conversation forefront so we can maybe be talking about it and say, that's not right either? How do we safeguard ourselves as a society to make sure we're not going that other way? That is literally at the heart of what I was trying to do.
I can hear that. And I validate that. I hope, my hope is that we can get to a space of middle.
Oh, me too.
I hope it happens soon. And I hope that our kids who are going to be impacted by the same things can make a difference in this way, and can ensure that, because that is everything I've tried to teach my kids, that equality is important, and making sure that all things considered, that people are treated equally. And that is a piece of my heart as a parent. And I'm hopeful that we can get to a middle space, and that it doesn't swing any other direction, but that we can get to a space where it's equal and equitable for all people.
Right.
So,
as middle as it can be. Because again, as you know, and I know I mentioned my daughter before, but I have a daughter that's coming up quickly into the workforce, and nothing would make my blood boil more knowing that she's being paid less for a role just because she is a woman. And I would also say, though, I hope she's not getting opportunities and getting advancements just because she's a woman. Because I think I said this earlier. I think that would be just as degrading to an individual to say, well, you don't really deserve this, but because you're a gender that we're looking for, we're going to give it to you. And that was meant to be a little snarky there, because I hope that's not happening, because I think that that's as damaging as not giving people opportunity because of the gender that they are. And I think giving them opportunity because of the gender they are is still as equally damaging. So as a father who has a daughter coming up, I agree with you. I want there to be more equal. I want it to be more in the middle. I want people to look at my daughter not as a female coming into the workforce, but as a competent resource that can do X, Y, and Z and bring different, to your point, ideas or different talents, energy, whatever it is to the table. I want that to be recognized. Mm-hmm. And when these situations that I've mentioned happened, you mentioned, you gave me, I think, a challenge early on. Did I say anything? No, I wish I would have now. Like, after having this conversation and hearing your point of view, I wish I would have said something to say, so it's okay now to just say they're only qualifying, quality that we're looking for is because they're a female. That is wrong. I absolutely wish I would have said that, but I didn't. I sat quiet and I just let it happen. And to me, that's where my voice can start being used a little bit, is to say, okay, we should safeguard the workforce. And here I am in this podcast, challenging you, Jamie, to say, the workforce is changing, and say, where am I at in the mix? How am I safeguarding the workforce? Right.
Absolutely.
So,
well, and truthfully, Mahlon, and if I felt like it was swinging the other way, I would have a problem with that too. If men were being overlooked for things simply because they are men, I wouldn't be okay with that either. I think the reason this is so frustrating at this space, and why it's so hard to even go there, is because I don't feel like that's where we're at. I feel like the pendulum is still over on this side where we're not equal. And if it were swinging the other way, because I believe that equality is important, it wouldn't be okay with me either. And I hope that I would have the wherewithal and the backbone to stand up and say, this isn't okay either. So, by all means, I don't, at the end of the day, it's not that I'm like, sit down, men, it's not your turn, it's my turn. That's not where I'm at either.
Well, and I think that's helpful. I think that's because, again, we both can do our job. And I think this is where we finally start finding middle ground, right, Jamie? Is that we can say, let's help each other. And again, each other meaning men and women in the workforce, help make it balanced. And when we find that it's not balanced on either side of the equation, either, benefiting the men or benefiting the woman, let's not be shy. Let's not, sit on our hands and just be like, well, this is how the world works now. And now I'm starting to become bitter and angry silently, and I'll just suffer here in silence. Let's have those conversations. Let's bring it to the right people and yes. Say, you know what, this is not sitting with me because this is what I observed. This is what I heard. And I don't like this. I think that's where we're going to have real change. But the lesson that I learned from all of this is we are responsible. You and I and everybody else is responsible for guarding. Thank you. Safeguarding the workforce to make sure that the pendulum doesn't swing the other way. And that gives me a little bit of excitement because before this conversation and before the passion started coming out of both of us, I was sitting here saying, what am I supposed to do to something that, I have very little control into? But if we all kind of took that stand and we all kind of helped one another, that voice gets louder. And I think we do have more of a impact to that pendulum, and maybe we can stop it from swinging all the way over. Maybe we can get it to as much in the middle as possible, and help all of us out.
Yeah. Well, and truthfully, I think the truth of the matter is that in, like I've said, in my work, it is a women dominated field of work. And so, having my voice heard is important. And part of the work, that just the nature of human services, is to make sure that everyone has a voice at the table. And I think if we start there, and if we can listen to experiences of people who do feel that there are disparities, if we can elevate the voices of the people who are being disparaged, that is where we can start making impact, is to be on the side of people to be to be in the side of justice and equality. That's where we make an impact. No, I can't do jack squat to make sure that the IT industry is equal. I can't do anything to make sure that more women are graduating from college in IT so that you can have 50% of your workforce be women. But what I can do is make sure that in my world and in my corner of my office, that when you come into my office and you talk about things that are happening, if there is something I can do about it, I'm going to do something about it. And if I can elevate that experience to make sure that it doesn't happen again, I'm going to elevate that experience to make sure it doesn't happen again. Man or woman.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that's really great. And I'm not going to try to reopen this again because I feel like we're kind of sealing up this episode probably for the last time. But I do want to just call out that
God, please.
Yeah, there's one article that I didn't get to, which it really talked about, and it was kind of a contrasting document. But and I'm going to boil it down to is the geographic area of the United States sees vastly different things. And so, you and I have been talking about, I think in general, saying this pendulum is swinging. I do think, and I do recognize that it probably throughout the United States, it's still probably in varying degrees, right? So there's probably some states that the men are probably a little bit more favored than women. Then there's other states where women are more favored. So I just wanted to add that because surprisingly enough, the geographic area of the United States plays, or at least it seems to play, a pretty big factor into kind of where this perception is coming from or where this pendulum is, which I thought was fascinating. So, again, don't want to have to reopen it, but I just wanted to kind of add that one little blurb in there because it was shocking for me to kind of come across that.
Well, and I think the purpose, and truly the purpose, you can't paint a broad brush, right? You can't take one of these studies, which is why I didn't. I found a range, and every study I found was a range, right? Was within that range, and that's how I kind of came to that range. But you can't paint a broad brush. But the point is to look at those numbers and to look at those trends and say, okay, if this is where we're at, let's be aware of it in our space. Let's be aware of that in our circle and make sure that we're doing what we can and not perpetuating those things that we don't want to be part of our society. So, that I appreciate that because I do think it is vastly different. It's going to be vastly different in more diverse areas than it is going to be in, the middle of the country, right? It's just going to be different in different areas. So that makes sense.
And what's really cool about what we're doing here is, anybody that listens to this, take a look around. If you see some of this, inequality in the workplace happening either from a man's point of view or a female's point of view, I hope this encourages you, like it has encouraged me, to say, let's start raising our voices. Like that's not okay. And again, I'm sure we're all going to stop short of jeopardizing our job, but at the same time, I don't think we can just sit on our hands and become bitter because the landscape around us is changing and we're just letting it change. Because that's what, I don't think I was bitter, but I do think that's something that I'm noticing. And it's like, okay, how am I supposed to change that? So what I think is really cool about what we're doing is we're bringing these types of conversations up. And yes, we don't see eye to eye. You see it a little bit different than I see it. But the fact of the matter is we're talking about it and we're maybe putting ourselves on alert to say, okay, now keep an eye out for it. And if you see it happening, now we have an opportunity to, maybe start recognizing it for the first time. And then we have an obligation and an opportunity to say, okay, now we're going to start addressing this, to your point, in the ways that we can, the ways that we have that circle of influence and circle of control, which I think, again, just is like a snowball. We'll keep growing. But this has been really cool. I know we both have had passion come out, but this has been a really good conversation. And I hope you feel the same way, because we're talking about something that I don't think for a long time we've just kind of put on autopilot. And I think it's nice every once in a while to kick the tires and say, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Are we still seeing the results we're expecting to see? What is the landscape saying about this, or the culture saying about this? And does it need to be shifted a little bit? And I think this is really a temperature check for me, at least. This was a temperature check and kind of saying, let's share our experiences. Let's bounce them off one another, and let's see what the other one thinks. So I think it's good.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And end it with for sure.
Well, I promise this isn't the last episode of Roundtable Mindset. We'll be back again.
It might be weeks and weeks, but hey, we'll be back.
This is one of those episodes where when we told you we were professional friends, this is why, because Mahlon and I are going to get on the phone after this and we're going to have a little chat and it'll be fine. Like, we'll make each other laugh and remind each other why we're besties, and it'll be fine. So
it will be fine. And again, I hope it comes across, Jamie. You know, a little bit in our conversation, I feel like that mutual respect was lost. Like, you weren't recognizing I was giving it to you, and I hope you can see that. And I want the audience to see too, is that was never my intention to take that from you, as I don't think that was your intention to take it from me. And it was never meant to be personal, although we're talking about very personal topics. But again, that respect never went away. And it kind of bothers me a little bit. And this will be our after show conversation, I'm sure, where how do I personally continue having conversations like these and still kind of show that mutual respect? Because I don't ever want whoever I talk to, even if I disagree with them or not, I never want them to walk away feeling like I just disrespected them. And that's never a goal, because then real conversation doesn't happen and real listening doesn't happen, because now it's just one person offending the other person, which is never productive. So,
well, and I think just as a takeaway for myself, I think that the passion that I feel about this subject kind of surprises me. Just given the outcomes we've had after 2 recordings of this episode.
No more recordings after this.
I'm never talking about this with you again, ever. I'm going to talk to somebody who agrees with me, but no, but for real, I mean, I think just, and it's not just the passion that came out between the two of us in this conversation. I think this is it's a topic that incites a lot of emotion and a lot of brings back a lot of experiences that women for ages have had, and so I know for me, this is an important topic, and it's important to me, and because it's important to me, that's why I will continue to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen in my sphere of influence. So, thanks for diving in again.
Yeah. And again, the takeaway for me is we're going to be looking at it for both angles. Because I think there was a part of me, I'm not going to lie, that I was trying to take care of the man side of it, right? I'm a man, so I'm supposed to be on that side, and I'm supposed to be safeguarding that to make sure that things stay right for the man. And let's safeguard it for everybody. Why not? Right? Like, why can't I be a champion for the other side, and why can't the other side be a champion for me? And so a lot of those barriers are starting to break down, even barriers that maybe I didn't even realize I still had, but here they are, kind of in that ugly truth as we're talking. So this conversation has been really great for me, and growth for me. I still have my opinion, and you know it, but I think as we're wrapping up, like, we're hearing each other. Yes, the passion subsided, and yes, we got our viewpoints out there, and yes, we let the steam out of the collar a little bit. But really, at the end of the day, we want the same thing. And the realization, for me at least, was we can be champions for both men and women, which sounds stupid for me to say out loud, but really, that's probably something fresh and new that I've never really stopped and thought about. Right?
Well, and quite frankly, let's be champions for people. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, let's just be champions for people. Let's just be good people, which is really the goal. You guys will never know how many minutes we took out of me just with a mute button and my face red and steaming on the Zoom. So just know this was fun.
Just know
it ended well.
Just know the end result was fun. The process to get here, sometimes it's a little grueling, but you know what?
It's what we do.
It's what we do. And it's the growth that I love, and it's the realizations, and it's the perspectives. It's all of it. It's everything that we've talked about. So, but I agree with you. one last time, let's never talk about this subject again, or at least for a long, long time.
Well, yeah, maybe not on a Tuesday.
Maybe not in the next 10 years. How about that?
I'm just thinking, like, in the middle of my work week might not be the time to talk about this subject. Let's do it at the end of a vacation month or something.
Or just coming back from vacation. We're like, you know what? I don't even care. What's going on? What's happening? Okay, let's talk about it.
The world is on fire, and it's okay.
Yeah, all right.
Well, it was good. We'll come back again. I promise this isn't the last episode. We'll be back again. So
next week.
We'll see you next time.
All right. See you
next time. Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999 or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.